We got married yesterday. That was all she said. No smile, no apology. Just those 4 words spoken lightly as if she were telling me what she'd eaten for breakfast. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. The kettle on my stove was screaming, the kitchen window was rattling in the wind, and my heart was already beating a little faster than usual. I held the phone away from my ear and looked at it, as if the screen itself might explain what she meant. Yesterday, I repeated slower this time. Less, she said. There was a pause after that, not the awkward kind, more like the pause of someone who had already decided the conversation was over. I waited for her to add something. Anything. A reason. An explanation. A laugh that said she was joking, but she didn't. I turned the stove off with a shaking hand. The kettle clicked into silence, and suddenly the kitchen felt too quiet. I could hear the old clock on the wall ticking, every second louder than the last. I sat down at the small wooden table where my son used to do his homework, the same table where I once iced cupcakes for his 10th birthday. I thought you were still planning it, I said carefully. That's why I asked when the wedding was. Well, she replied, her voice calm, almost cheerful. Plans change. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the thin crack in the wall above the sink. My tea had gone cold. I didn't notice. All I could hear was that sentence echoing in my head. We got married yesterday. Before that phone call, my life was ordinary in the quiet way I had grown to appreciate. I'm not a woman who needs excitement anymore. I like routines. I like knowing what my mornings will look like, what the house will smell like when I wake up. Every day, I woke up just before 6. The house always creaked a little as it cooled from the night, like it was stretching awake with me. I'd make coffee the same way I always had, 2 scoops, no sugar, and stand by the window, watching the neighbor's cat slink along the fence. On Sundays, I went to church. On Wednesdays, I volunteered at the community pantry. On Fridays, I called my son. He was my only child. I raised him mostly on my own after his father left when he was still in grade school. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting matches or slammed doors. One day, his father just sat at the edge of the bed and said he needed a different life. I learned early that people can leave quietly and still take a lot with them. My son grew up gentle, thoughtful, the kind of boy who held doors open and called me when he arrived somewhere safely, even as an adult. When he introduced me to the woman who would later become his wife, I tried to welcome her with an open heart. Her name was Lena. She was polite in that careful, measured way. Always said ma'am. Always thanked me for meals. But she never lingered. She never relaxed. When she smiled, it didn't quite reach her eyes, and when she hugged me, her arms stayed stiff, as if she were hugging a stranger on obligation. Still, I told myself not to read too much into it. Not everyone wears their heart on their sleeve. And my son, my sweet, loyal son, seemed happy. That was what mattered. They'd been together for almost 2 years. When he told me he was thinking about proposing, I cried. I cried right there in the grocery store aisle, between the bread and the canned soup. I'd always dreamed of helping plan his wedding. Nothing extravagant. Just small things, tasting cakes, folding napkins, fussing over flowers. When he finally said, "Mom, we're engaged," I could hear the smile in his voice. But after that, things changed. The wedding talk slowed, then stopped altogether. Every time I asked gently, "Have you set a date yet? Do you need help with anything?" the answers were vague. "We're busy right now. We're still figuring things out. Lena wants something simple." I told myself to be patient. Young couples like to do things their own way. I didn't want to be that mother, the one who pushes, who inserts herself where she isn't wanted, so I waited. And I watched. Lena stopped answering my texts as often. When she did reply, it was short, neutral. My son still called, but never when she was around, I could tell. There was always a certain hush in his voice, like he was speaking from another room. Once, when I suggested we all have dinner together, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "We'll see," he said finally. "Things are a little complicated right now." I didn't ask what he meant. Mothers learn, sometimes the hard way, that pushing too much only makes children pull away. Then came that morning. I was standing in my kitchen, holding my phone, genuinely trying to make conversation. I hadn't called to pry. I just wanted to feel included in my son's life, even a little. So, I said, lighthearted, "Have you finally picked a date? When's the wedding?" And that's when Lena said it. "We got married yesterday." After the shock wore off, something else crept in, not anger, not yet, but confusion. Why the secrecy? Why exclude me entirely? There had been no fight, no falling out. At least none that I knew of. As I sat there alone, the afternoon light slanting through the blinds, one thought kept returning, heavier each time. You don't hide something like that unless there's a reason. And whatever that reason was, I had a feeling it had very little to do with love. After that phone call, I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I'd always thought something like this would break me instantly, that I'd collapse into tears or anger or both. But instead, I felt still. Like my emotions were holding their breath. I cleaned the kitchen. Slowly, I washed a cup that hadn't been used, wiped a counter that was already clean. My hands moved on their own while my mind replayed the conversation again and again, searching for something I might have missed. A hesitation in her voice. A crack, but there was nothing. Lena had sounded certain, finished. That night, my son didn't call. I told myself he was busy, newly married, probably exhausted. I reminded myself that he was a grown man, not a boy who needed to check in with his mother every day. Still, I slept poorly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him as a child, standing at the front door with his backpack, waving before getting on the school bus. Back then, he always turned around one last time to make sure I was watching. By morning, my stillness had turned into something heavier. At church, I couldn't focus on the sermon. I smiled when people greeted me, nodded at familiar faces, but everything felt muffled, as if I were underwater. When the pastor spoke about family and unity, my chest tightened. I wondered how many people already knew about the wedding. I wondered if I was the only one left in the dark. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped, but it wasn't my son. It was a message from my sister. "Did you hear the news? Congratulations!" I pulled over. My hands were shaking as I typed back. "Hear what news?" The reply came almost instantly. About the wedding. Facebook's full of pictures. I sat there in my car, engine idling, sunlight flashing through the trees. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Then, slowly, I opened the app I rarely used anymore, and there it was. A photo of my son standing in a small courthouse room. He was wearing a gray jacket I'd bought him years ago for job interviews. He looked thinner than I remembered. Beside him was Lena in a simple white dress, holding a bouquet of flowers that looked store-bought. They were smiling. Everyone else had seen this before I had. The comments underneath were filled with hearts and congratulations. Friends, coworkers, distant relatives, even people I barely knew. I scrolled until my finger ached. There was no mention of me. No, "Wish your mom could have been there." No explanation. I drove home in silence. When I walked into my house, it felt different, like I was a guest instead of the woman who had built her life there. I sat down in my living room and looked at the framed photos on the wall. My son at 5, missing his front teeth. My son at 16, awkward and tall. My son on graduation day, hugging me with one arm because he was embarrassed to be seen doing more. I picked up my phone and called him. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice sounded tired. "Careful." "I saw the pictures," I said. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. Oh, he replied, "Yeah, that's all you're going to say." Another pause. Longer this time. "We didn't want a big thing," he said finally. "Lena thought it would be easier this way." "Easier for who?" I asked. "For everyone," he said quickly. Too quickly. There was no reason to make it complicated. I closed my eyes. "Did you think I'd make it complicated?" "No," he said. But there was hesitation there, a thin crack. "It's just, Mom, things have been stressful." I wanted to ask him whose stress mattered more. I wanted to ask him when I had become someone he needed protection from. But I didn't. I swallowed the questions and nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I wish you'd told me, I said instead. I know, he replied. We just wanted something private. Private, not secret. That was the word he chose. I let it go. After we hung up, I sat very still again. But this time the stillness felt different. It felt like something had shifted, not snapped, but loosened. Trust doesn't always break loudly. Sometimes it just thins until you can see through it. Over the next few weeks, little things began to surface. Nothing dramatic, just small, uncomfortable moments that lingered longer than they should have. When I sent Lena a congratulatory card, she never acknowledged it. No thank you, no message. When I asked my son if they'd be visiting anytime soon, he said they were busy settling in. When I suggested dinner, there was always an excuse. Then came the paperwork. A letter arrived in the mail addressed to my son at my address. That wasn't unusual. He'd never officially changed everything over. But the return address caught my eye. A bank. I didn't open it. I set it aside on the counter and waited. When he came by later that week to pick up some old things, I handed it to him. Oh, he said, glancing at it quickly before sliding it into his jacket pocket. Too quickly. What's that about? I asked casually. Just boring stuff, he replied. You know how banks are. I watched him as he spoke. His jaw tightened. His shoulders lifted slightly, defensive without meaning to be. I had seen that posture before, years ago when he lied about breaking a neighbor's window. That night I lay awake listening to the clock tick again. I thought about the secret wedding, the rushed smiles in the pictures, the way Lena had spoken, calm, final sounding, and for the first time a thought formed clearly in my mind. What if the wedding wasn't about love at all? What if it was about timing? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew this much: people don't move this quietly unless they're trying not to be heard. And whatever they were hiding, I was closer to it than they realized. I didn't become suspicious overnight. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sitting there with red string and a corkboard, imagining conspiracies. I was a mother who had been gently pushed aside, trying to understand why. The first thing I noticed was how careful my son had become with his words. When he called, he never spoke freely anymore. There was always a pause before he answered certain questions, like he was checking something in his head first, or checking who was in the room with him. He stopped using phrases like, "we're thinking," or "we might." Everything was suddenly firm, decided, closed. One evening, while we were on the phone, I heard a voice in the background. Lena's. She wasn't saying anything directly to me, but she was close enough that I could hear the tone. Sharp. Low, controlled. My son's voice changed instantly. "Mom, I've got to go," he said. "We'll talk later." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling foolish for wanting more. I told myself I was imagining things, that this was what adulthood looked like, children growing their own lives, separate from their parents. Still, a quiet ache settled into my chest, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but refuses to leave. The next clue came from somewhere I didn't expect. It was my neighbor, Ruth, who had known me for over 20 years. She stopped me one afternoon as I was getting the mail. "I saw your son last weekend," she said warmly. "Such a handsome boy." "Oh," I replied, forcing a smile. "When was that?" "Saturday," she said. He and his wife were loading boxes into a car. Looked like moving or something. Saturday. That was the same weekend they'd gotten married. I thanked her and went inside, my thoughts already racing. My son had told me they were settling in, but he hadn't said anything about moving. Moving where? And why so suddenly? Later that night, I checked my email, something I rarely did unless I was expecting a bill. Among the usual spam was a notification from my bank. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I clicked it anyway. There had been activity on an account tied to my son's name. It wasn't my account. I'd helped him open it years ago when he was in college, back when he needed a co-signer. He'd assured me he'd moved everything since then. I'd believed him. Why wouldn't I? The balance had changed significantly. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I didn't recognize the transaction. It wasn't a small amount. It was the kind of number that makes your stomach drop before your mind catches up. I didn't call him right away. Instead, I sat at my desk and breathed slowly, counting each inhale and exhale like the therapist I'd seen years ago had taught me. Panic wouldn't help. Assumptions wouldn't help. Facts would. The next day I went to the bank. The woman at the counter was young, polite, and apologetic. She explained that because my name was still on the account, I had the right to inquire, but only inquire. I couldn't make changes without my son present. What was the transaction for? I asked. She hesitated. Then she turned the screen slightly so I could see. A deposit, followed by a withdrawal. The description listed a joint account, recently opened joint. My hands tightened around my purse strap. I thought he closed this account, I said quietly. She gave me a sympathetic look. It's still active. I left the bank feeling unsteady, like the ground beneath me had shifted again. That night, I pulled out a folder I hadn't opened in years. It held old documents, deeds, insurance papers, copies of contracts. Things you keep because you're supposed to, even when you don't want to think about them. That's when I noticed something else, a form I didn't recognize. It was folded, slightly worn, tucked between other papers. I unfolded it slowly, my heart beating louder with every second. A beneficiary update. My son's handwriting was unmistakable. He'd listed a spouse, Lena, and dated it. The date was 2 weeks before the wedding. Before he'd told me anything had changed, I sat back in my chair, the paper trembling in my hands. Suddenly, the pieces began to line up in a way that made my throat tighten. The secret wedding, the rushed move, the financial changes. The way Lena spoke, firm, final, unbothered. This wasn't impulsive, it was planned. I thought about the conversations we'd had over the years. About the times my son had assured me everything was fine. About the trust I'd placed in him, not blindly, but willingly, because he was my child. And I wondered how long I'd been standing in the dark while decisions were made around me. When I finally called him that evening, my voice was calm. Too calm, perhaps. Did you open a new joint account? I asked. There was a long silence on the other end. Why are you asking? He replied. Because I deserved the truth I wanted to say. Because secrecy had consequences. Because mothers are not invisible. But I didn't say any of that. I just want to understand, I said instead. He sighed. Lena thought it made sense. We're married now. Married now. Not we love each other. Not we're building a life. Just married now. As if that single word explained everything. I hung up feeling colder than before. And that was when I realized something that hurt more than any discovery so far. This wasn't just Lena's doing. My son had chosen this too. The truth doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes in waves, each one knocking the breath out of you just when you think you've steadied yourself. After that last call with my son, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator through the wall, replaying years of memories with a new lens. Moments that once felt harmless now felt rehearsed, controlled. In the early morning, I made myself tea I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table with the beneficiary form in front of me. I traced the ink with my finger, the date circled in my mind like a bruise. 2 weeks before the wedding. 2 weeks before I'd even known there was a wedding. I realized then that I wasn't dealing with an emotional oversight. I was dealing with a legal one. Later that day, my son came by unannounced. I heard his car pull into the driveway and felt my chest tighten. There was a time when that sound brought me comfort. Now it brought questions. He walked in carrying a small box of things he said he'd forgotten, old books, a jacket, a framed photo from college. He avoided my eyes as he set it down. Mom, he said, finally looking up, you sound upset on the phone yesterday. I nodded. I am. He shifted his weight. I don't want this to turn into something bigger than it needs to be. That sentence landed harder than he probably intended. Bigger than it needs to be. I repeated. You got married without telling me. You changed financial documents without mentioning it. And now you're saying this shouldn't be a big deal. He rubbed the back of his neck. It's not like we did anything wrong. I reached for the folder and slid the paper across the table toward him. "Then explain this to me," I said. He froze when he saw it. For a second, just a second, the mask slipped. His eyes flicked away, his jaw clenched. "Why were you still going through my things?" he asked, defensive. "I wasn't," I replied evenly. "This was in my files. You used my address. My name is still on that account. You didn't think that through." He exhaled sharply and sank into the chair across from me. "Lena didn't want complications," he said quietly. "And I'm a complication?" I asked. He didn't answer. That silence was the loudest thing in the room. I stood up slowly, not because I was angry, but because I needed to feel grounded. I leaned against the counter and looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the boy I remembered. He wasn't even the man I thought I knew. He looked tired, pressured, like someone who'd been told what to do for so long he'd forgotten how to push back. "When did you decide not to tell me?" I asked. He swallowed. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" He hesitated, then said, "Lena was worried you'd have opinions." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "I always have opinions." "That's never stopped you before?" She said it would turn into pressure. He continued, "That you'd want to be involved. That it would feel like we were doing it for everyone else. And instead," I said, "you did it against me." He looked up sharply. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I asked. For the first time, his voice cracked. "You don't understand how hard things have been." "Then help me understand," I said gently. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "Lena was afraid." "Off what?" "Off losing control," he admitted. "Off feeling like she came second." Second, I thought about every time I'd stepped back, every time I'd swallowed a comment, declined an invitation, pretended I didn't notice being excluded. I had already made myself small. "And what about me?" I asked quietly. "Where did I come in?" He looked down. She said if we didn't start our marriage with firm boundaries, it would never feel like ours. I nodded slowly. "So you built those boundaries by cutting me out completely." He didn't deny it. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not into anger, but into clarity. I wasn't dealing with cruelty. I was dealing with fear. And fear, when left unchecked, can do just as much damage. "I'm not asking to control your life," I said. "I'm asking for honesty." He stood up abruptly. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "Every conversation turns into guilt." "I'm not trying to guilt you," I replied. "I'm trying to protect myself." He paused at the door. "From what?" "From being erased," I said. He left without another word. That evening, Lena called me. It was the first time she'd called directly since the wedding. "I hear you've been upset," she said. Her tone was polite. Careful, like someone speaking to a stranger. "I have questions," I replied. She sighed softly. "I wish you'd just trust us." "I trusted you when you married my son without telling me," I said. "I trusted you when you changed legal documents without a conversation." "Trust goes both ways." There was a pause. Then her voice hardened. "Our marriage isn't about you." "No," I agreed. "But honesty is?" She didn't respond to that. Before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. "We did what we needed to do to feel secure." Secure, and that's when it finally became clear. The wedding wasn't hidden because of love. It was hidden because of control. Once you see the truth clearly, you can't unsee it. After my conversation with Lena, I stopped trying to fix things with words. I had spent weeks explaining, asking, softening my tone, shrinking myself to keep the peace. It hadn't brought me closer to my son. It had only taught them that I would bend. So instead, I became quiet. Not the wounded kind of quiet, the intentional kind. I stopped calling first. I stopped sending long messages that went unanswered. When my son reached out, I responded kindly, briefly. I didn't accuse, I didn't plead, I observed. And what I observed told me more than any argument ever could. The distance between us didn't shrink, it widened. Not because I pulled away, but because there was nothing left for me to chase. Without my questions, my discomfort, my attempts to reconnect, there was no friction. And in that smooth silence, the truth began to surface on its own. The next piece came from a family gathering I wasn't invited to. It was my nephew's birthday, a small get-together at my sister's house. I found out about it afterward through photos posted online. My son was there. So was Lena. They were standing in the corner of the picture, his arm around her waist, her hand resting possessively on his chest. What caught my attention wasn't that they'd gone without me. It was who else was there. A man I didn't recognize. He was older, well-dressed, standing close to Lena in one of the photos, laughing at something she'd said. In another, he had his arm around her shoulder in a way that felt familiar. I didn't jump to conclusions, but I remembered something Lena had once mentioned in passing, a relative who had helped her out financially in the past. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. That night, I called my sister. "Oh, that's her uncle," she said casually when I asked. Or something like that. He was very involved in the wedding, apparently. Paid for a lot. Paid. My chest tightened. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. A rushed courthouse wedding. Financial documents updated in advance. A benefactor hovering in the background. I began to wonder if the wedding wasn't just about control, but about timing. A few days later, my son asked if we could talk. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. It was the same place we'd gone after his college graduation. Back then, he'd ordered the sweetest thing on the menu and laughed when I teased him about it. This time, he barely touched his coffee. "I feel like you're shutting me out," he said quietly. I looked at him across the table. I learned from the best. He flinched. "That's not fair," he said. "Neither was finding out about your wedding on Facebook." I replied calmly. He sighed. "Lena thinks you don't support us. I support you," I said. "But support doesn't mean silence." He rubbed his temples. "You don't understand what's at stake?" That phrase, "what's at stake?" sent a chill through me. "Explain it to me," I said. He hesitated. Then finally said, "Her uncle is helping us buy a house." There it was. He wanted certain assurances. My son continued, that we were committed. That there wouldn't be interference. Interference. "That's what I am now," I asked softly. "No," he said quickly. "It's just he's old-fashioned. He believes marriage creates stability, and he needed proof." I said, "Yes," my son admitted. "He wouldn't move forward unless we were legally married." I nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. The secret wedding, the rush, the financial maneuvering. It all led here. "So you married her quickly," I said. "Changed documents, opened joint accounts, all to satisfy someone else." "It wasn't like that," he insisted. "I love her." "I believe you," I said, and I did. "But love doesn't excuse deception." He looked down at the table. "We didn't think you'd understand. You didn't give me the chance," I replied. There was a long silence between us. The cafe hummed with low conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine filling the space where words should have been. "I need you to know something," I said finally. "I'm not angry about the wedding itself. I'm angry about being used as an obstacle instead of being treated as family." He swallowed. "Lena was afraid you'd challenge the arrangement." "And would I have been wrong too?" I asked. He didn't answer. That was when I realized my role in their story had already been decided. I wasn't the mother to be included. I was the variable to be managed. So I made a decision of my own. I stopped protecting their image, not with gossip, not with confrontation, but with truth. When family asked why I hadn't been at the wedding, I told them plainly. I wasn't told. I said, no bitterness, no theatrics, just the truth, and truth, I learned, has a way of traveling faster than lies ever do. The ripple effect of speaking the truth was slower than I expected, but it came quietly at first. Family members called, not to scold, not to accuse, but to check in, to ask what had happened, to understand. Friends messaged me, confused but concerned. Even neighbors who'd heard rumors reached out. The more I shared calmly, the clearer the picture became to everyone else. Lena's insistence on secrecy, my son's complicity, the rushed courthouse wedding, and the financial moves made without discussion. I didn't need to shout or exaggerate. The facts spoke for themselves. And in those facts, people could see the reality of control and manipulation, A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years approached me one Sunday after church. She lowered her voice, leaning close as if confessing a secret. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said, "but Lena was bragging at my work about how she got everything done without upsetting anyone important, without upsetting you, specifically." I nodded slowly. Not angered, not shocked, just absorbing. The betrayal had layers, and now I could see them all. A week later, a small family brunch was held at my sister's house. My son and Lena were invited, of course. When they arrived, I noticed the tension immediately. Lena's smile was tight. She moved carefully, keeping a careful distance between herself and me. My son avoided eye contact as he sat, fidgeting with his napkin. I didn't confront them outright. I didn't need to. Others had already asked pointed questions. The conversations flowed gently around me, but every word carried weight. Every glance confirmed what I had already learned. They had underestimated the quiet dignity of truth. During brunch, Lena excused herself to the kitchen, and I overheard her speaking in a hushed voice to my sister's friend. "She didn't need to know everything," she said, clearly frustrated. "It was easier this way." I took a slow breath and moved closer. "I didn't need to know everything," I said quietly, "just the parts that directly involved me, the parts that affected me. The wedding, the finances, those were my concern." She froze, turned, and for the first time, I saw her falter. She opened her mouth, closed it, and simply walked away. That small moment, as simple as it was, carried a strange satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't humiliation. It was the quiet assertion of my presence, my voice, my place in my own family. By the end of the brunch, the whispers were no longer behind closed doors. My extended family had begun to understand the circumstances, and a few approached me privately, offering support, acknowledging that they had been kept in the dark as well. Even my son, sitting silently beside Lena, seemed smaller than usual. Not diminished exactly, but aware. It wasn't public humiliation. It wasn't cruelty. It was truth in motion. Later that week, I received a text from Lena. "Can we talk?" I stared at it. My fingers hovered over the phone for a long moment before I responded, "Yes." But not today. I didn't need to rush into a confrontation. I had learned that timing was a tool. Waiting allowed clarity, and clarity was worth more than any angry words. A few days later, we met in a small cafe, just the two of us. Lena sat stiffly across from me, coffee untouched. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, her face carefully neutral. "I want to apologize," she said after a long pause. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I was protecting the marriage." I studied her carefully. There was sincerity there, yes, but also a sense of fear. Fear that I might lash out, fear that I might reject her entirely. "I understand why you felt that way," I said calmly. "But honesty is part of protection too. Hiding things causes more damage than it prevents." She nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. "I see that now." I took a deep breath. "I forgive you," I said. "Not because everything is perfect, but because I refuse to carry resentment forever. You were afraid. That doesn't make you evil, it just makes you human." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you." We didn't hug, we didn't cry. But something shifted, an invisible weight lifted, just a little. That evening, I reflected on the entire experience. The secret wedding, the hidden accounts, the tension, the silent dinners, the whispered conversations. I realized that life had a way of teaching lessons, sometimes painfully, sometimes subtly. The lesson I took away was this: love, family, and honesty are intertwined. You cannot protect love by hiding truth. You cannot nurture family by treating members as obstacles. And most importantly, no matter how much you love someone, you must protect your dignity calmly, quietly, and without malice. In the following weeks, my relationship with my son and Lena slowly normalized. It wasn't the same as it had been before the secret wedding, perhaps it never would be. But it was healthier. There was acknowledgement of boundaries, a mutual understanding, and, surprisingly, a sense of respect that had been absent before. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. My mornings remained the same: coffee, cat watching, old music in the background. The house creaked the same way it always had. Yet something fundamental had shifted inside me. I no longer waited for permission to be part of my own family. I had found my place simply by standing firm, calmly, and speaking my truth. And sometimes the quiet victories are the loudest. After that brunch, after Lena's apology and my quiet assertion of boundaries, life slowly began to feel ordinary again. Not dull, not static, but steady. I woke up in the mornings without that tight ache in my chest, the one that had been there since the first phone call. The kettle whistled as usual, the cat slinked past the window, the sun spilled across the counter in golden slices. It was ordinary, yes, but ordinary felt like a gift after months of uncertainty and quiet tension. My son visited more often, though differently now. He would sit across from me at the table, coffee in hand, hands no longer fidgeting with nerves or guilt. We spoke more honestly, sometimes about the mundane things, sometimes about the complicated. He was trying. Lena, too, had begun to let her guard down, showing small gestures of warmth that felt genuine rather than performative. She even brought me a pie one Sunday, homemade, not store-bought. A peace offering, but more importantly, a sign that she recognized our relationship mattered. I didn't rush into forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't something you sprinkle over a situation like sugar. It is earned, cultivated, and given when you're ready. And I was ready, not because the hurt had vanished, but because holding on to it would only have weighed me down further. Holding on to anger would have made me complicit in my own suffering. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch, the wind rustling the trees, my son said something that caught me off guard. "Mom," he said slowly, "I didn't realize how much my decisions would affect you. I thought keeping you out of it would make things simpler. I see now it just hurt everyone." I watched his eyes, searching for sincerity, and found it there, flickering behind the shadow of guilt. "I know," I said softly, "and now you know. That's what matters." We spoke at length that day about mistakes, misunderstandings, and the importance of communication. He admitted to feeling cornered by Lena's insistence, by financial pressures, by the expectations of family and society. It didn't excuse the secrecy, but it helped me understand. I realized that adults, no matter how well-meaning, sometimes stumble. They make decisions to protect themselves, even at the expense of those they love. I learned to let go of control. That was the hardest part. As a mother, I had always felt responsible for my son, for his happiness, for keeping his world safe. But part of love, I discovered, is allowing people to live their own lives, make their own mistakes, and learn from them. Even when it hurts, as months passed, the family gatherings grew warmer. There were no more whispered remarks behind my back, no exclusion from events, no curt responses to my texts. Our interactions had taken on a new rhythm, one grounded in honesty, mutual respect, and, yes, love. The cat still slinked past the porch. The morning light still spilled across the counters, and in the small ordinary things I found profound joy. One morning I sat at the kitchen table, listening to the birds sing, and thought about the lessons I had learned. Life is messy. People make choices that hurt others, sometimes intentionally, sometimes out of fear. But there is dignity in standing your ground, in speaking your truth calmly and clearly, in refusing to let silence erase your presence. I also learned that relationships, even when fractured, can heal. They may not return to exactly what they once were, and that is okay. Healing is about building something new from the pieces, not trying to reconstruct the past perfectly. I realized that forgiveness and boundaries are not opposites, they work together. Forgiveness frees the heart, boundaries protect it. I took a deep breath, the smell of brewing coffee filling the kitchen, and felt a quiet pride. Not pride in my son, not pride in Lena, but pride in myself for holding steady, for being honest, for refusing to be invisible in my own life. Later that day, my son and Lena visited with small gifts, laughter, and genuine warmth. We sat together on the porch, the sunlight warm on our faces. And for the first time in a long while, I felt fully present, fully included, fully heard. Sometimes the world teaches you lessons you never wanted but desperately needed. And sometimes you discover strength you didn't know you had, not by fighting loudly, but by standing quietly, firmly, with truth as your ally. Sitting here, reflecting on everything that happened, I realize how much life can change in just a few weeks. A secret wedding, hidden decisions, whispers behind my back, all of it could have broken me if I let it. But it didn't. Not completely. I discovered something important. You don't have to fight loudly to protect your place in the world. Sometimes quiet strength, honesty, and patience are enough. Family isn't always perfect. People make mistakes, act out of fear, or take shortcuts to protect themselves. But that doesn't mean we have to let those actions erase us. We can stand firm, speak our truth, and still choose compassion. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing. It means releasing the weight of anger so you can move forward with dignity. Looking back, I see that this journey taught me about boundaries, about trust, and about the resilience of love. My son and I, Lena and I, we didn't magically return to the way things were before. But we built something better, honest, respectful, and real. That's the kind of healing that lasts. So, I ask you, my dear viewers, have you ever been left out of something important in your family? How did you handle it? Did you speak up, stay silent, or find a balance somewhere in between? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if my story resonates with you, if it makes you feel seen or gives you courage to protect your own truth, please subscribe and share your story. Sometimes, simply knowing that others have faced the same struggles can remind us we're not alone. Remember, your voice matters. Your presence matters. And even when life feels unfair, honesty and quiet strength can guide you back to your place in your family, in your life, and in your own heart.